To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
It's the spookiest time of the year, and this Halloween, what better way to spend it than learning about the history of all the haunted mansions all over the world. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, this year for my Halloween special, I will be going in depth on every single haunted mansion from all over the world. We're talking the haunted mansion in Disneyland, the haunted mansion in Walt Disney World, the haunted mansion in Tokyo, Phantom Manor, what else? Mystic Manor. Those are all included, and I will be discussing secrets, details, history, everything behind all of these spooky attractions. This is gonna be a long one, so strap in. We are going to start with the OG, the original Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, California. Now, back before Disneyland was even built, Walt Disney had an idea for something called the Mickey Mouse Park, and in this Mickey Mouse Park there would be a main street. Coming off of this main street, there was a long, crooked, winding path that led up to an old, dilapidated house. This would become the inspiration for the haunted house, later known as the Haunted Mansion. Now, the original idea for the mansion in Mickey Mouse Park came from Imagineer Harper Goff. Walt Disney himself later assigned Imagineer Ken Anderson to build a story around Harper Goff's haunted house. Anderson then designed plans to build a New Orleans-themed land in a small transition area between Frontierland and Adventureland. Eventually, the designs evolved, and this whole new New Orleans area was designed to have a thieves market, a pirate's wax museum, and then a haunted house walkthrough attraction. Ken Anderson designed a old, dilapidated Southern-style antebellum house to go in this new Orleans-style land. It was around this time that the first inklings of the combined John Lafayette overarching story of New Orleans Square was first put into production. As most of us are aware, though, sadly it never came to be. Walt Disney, however, did not like the idea of an old dilapidated house in his pristine, beautiful Disneyland park. Walt would later visit the Winchester Mystery Mansion in San Jose, and he was captivated by the massive mansion and its stairs to nowhere, doors that opened to walls and holes, and all of its elevators, especially the elevators. Meanwhile, back in Burbank, Ken Anderson was still coming up with ideas for the story of the attraction. One of these stories included the original story for the Haunted Mansion featuring Captain Gore, who was killed by his nosy bride and then hanged himself, which is admittedly pretty dark for a Disney attraction, but that is why we have a sailboat weather vane on top of the Disneyland mansion to this day. Another idea for the mansion was a spooky, ghostly wedding party featuring well-known Disney villains like Maleficent and Chernabog, which admittedly would be pretty cool, but I mean, what are they doing in New Orleans? It is from this point where Imagineers Rolly Crump, who I know personally, and Yale Gracie took over for Ken Anderson to write the story for the mansion. In 1961, they were handing out pamphlets announcing the 1963 opening of the Haunted Mansion. Construction began later that year, and the exterior was completed in 1963. But unfortunately, Disney was running behind schedule, and the interior was not finished. See, the reason the mansion was not completed was because the New York World's Fair in 1964 and 1965, Walt Disney took a major part in designing pavilions and attractions for the fair. And it is my personal opinion that if the fair had never happened, Walt Disney would have been able to see the Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean open in their full glory. By putting all his time into the fair, they didn't work on Pirates or the Haunted Mansion, and by the time they were done, Walt Disney was already gone. But there is a silver lining. Because of the World's Fair, they were able to advance audio animatronic technology further thanks to Mr. Lincoln. After the fair, many more Imagineers jumped on the train to help design the Haunted Mansion, including Mark Davis, Ex Atencio, and Claude Coates. These are all huge names if you know Imagineering. After Rolly showed Walt all of his designs for things like talking chairs, candlemen, coffin clocks, man-eating plants, tiki busts, and living gypsy wagons, Walt let Rolly work on a passion project of his called the Museum of the Weird. Now, the Museum of the Weird would be pretty much the same thing as the Blue Bayou, a restaurant tied to a certain attraction which guests could dine in and see different parts of the attraction as the guests rode by. The museum wouldn't be haunted per se, but it would have a lot of odd curiosities in it. Although Although this project was eventually shelved, some objects that were going to be in the Museum of the Weird eventually found their way into the Haunted Mansion and can still be seen there today, like this chair. Famously, Mark Davis and Claude Coates disagreed on whether the ride should be scary or funny in the classic Disney way. Eventually, they both got their way, with the beginning half up until the attic scene being relatively creepy, and the graveyard through the end of the attraction being really fun and Disney style. Me personally, I enjoy the creepy stuff. They designed many different audio animatronics for the attraction, especially for the graveyard scene. And with the audio animatronics added into the ride and problems with capacity and moving people through the actual attraction, the idea of a walkthrough style haunted house was scrapped, and they made it an Omnimover style attraction, kind of like Journey Through Inner Space. In fact, the Omnimover system was even better than the walkthrough. They could face the guests where they wanted them to face, and it would feel like you were more alone and isolated inside this haunted house. I think it was a good idea. The mansion opened to the public on August 12, 1969, and featured a character in it in the attic scene called the Hatbox Ghost, which was only there for the first few days of operation. It was taken out mysteriously later. No one knows where the original audio animatronic for the Hatbox Ghost is now. The attraction was a huge success and helped attract crowds to Disneyland after Walt Disney's death. The attraction stands there to this day and has the honor of being my official favorite attraction in any Disney park ever. So, congratulations, The Haunted Mansion. In October of 2001, Haunted Mansion Holiday premiered. It was a seasonal overlay featuring the characters from The Nightmare Before Christmas. It still goes to this day, and many fans enjoy it. I enjoy it, but not as much as the original mansion. And on April 10th, 2015, it was officially confirmed that the Haunted Mansion character, the Hatbox Ghost that had been lost since opening week, would be returning to the mansion. He's there today. Sometimes he works, sometimes he doesn't. Now, enough with all that history stuff. Let's get into the nitty-gritty, secrets, details, and a virtual walkthrough of the Haunted Mansion. Now, you start in front of the mansion at the gates. It is here you can see the corrupted elegance of the mansion. While in the queue, you pass through a pet cemetery and a human one, and then you enter the main foyer of the house. From the foyer, you enter the stretching room, each depicting a guest to the mansion as they appeared in their corruptible, mortal state. The room begins to stretch with the ghost host narrating the entire time, the paintings growing more and more macabre as they stretch. Suddenly the lights go out, lightning flashes, you look up and see the ghost host himself hanging from the rafters. Something falls down and slams into the floor. The lights come back on, and you continue your tour. That kinda rhymes. From there, you pass into a hallway full of beautiful paintings, but every time the lightning flashes outside, they turn into grotesque, horrible versions of themselves. From there, you pass some very mean, judgmental busts and enter your doom buggy, finally. It is here you begin your tour of the house, going through the hallways, seeing doors knocking on themselves, endless hallways with floating candelabras, a breathing door, a clock with only the number 13 on it, and a poor old corpse who can't escape his coffin. I mean, come on, someone let the poor guy out of there. He's been stuck for such a long time. It is from here you enter Madame Leota's chamber, Madame Leota being a disembodied head inside a crystal ball. Madame Leota wasn't always a disembodied head though. As you can see from her tombstone outside the mansion in Walt Disney World, she was once alive, actually, and was a gypsy woman and a fortune teller in New Orleans around the mansion. Madame Leota, of course, was voiced by the incomparable Eleanor Audley, who did the voice for Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty and the evil stepmother in Cinderella. Madame Leota's face, though, is not that of Eleanor Audley's, but is instead that of one Leota Toombs, who, obviously, the character is named after. Behind Madame Leota on the chair there is a crow perched. Now, the crow was originally supposed to be the form the ghost host took as he toured you throughout the mansion. This idea was later scrapped, and now it's just kind of a crow. But if you look out throughout the ride, you will see the crow appearing in multiple different spots. From Madame Leota's room, you travel to the ballroom, where ghosts engage in a nice afterlife party, and other ghosts decide to boogie down on the dance floor, while a ghost musician plays on the organ that was used in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If you look really closely in the top right of the ballroom scene, you will see a spider on the spider web. Now, the spider is made out of rubber, but the spider web was actually a crack in the glass used for the Pepper's ghost illusion. Someone shot the glass at one point, and the shatter marks look kinda like a spider web, so they decided to put a rubber spider on there instead of taking the entire glass panel out of the Haunted Mansion attraction, costing them a lot of money. So this was kind of the wise choice there. Just put a rubber spider on it. From here you go to the attic scene where you will see lots of homages to the John Lafayette overarching theme I was talking about earlier, and you will come face to face with the beating heart bride Constance Hatchaway. After making it past Constance, you pass the good old Hatbox Ghost and descend into the graveyard. Look out for the crow at this point because he's there. In the graveyard it is even more of a party than it was inside. Ghosts are on a teeter-totter having tea, and look for the jumping ghosts behind the tombstones. Some of these were made from the same mold as the original Hatbox Ghost's face was made from. You pass the singing busts and my favorite character in the graveyard, the mummy. After this you enter the mausoleum and meet the 3 hitchhiking ghosts, Phineas, Ezra, and Gus. They try to stow away with you and you complete the attraction passing by Little Leota, a small version of the bride telling you to hurry back, and you exit into the blinding California sun. Now personally, the Disneyland version of the mansion is my favorite, although I will acknowledge that the graveyard scene does look better in Florida because the audio animatronics are better lit, but I do enjoy seeing the Hatbox Ghost and having the classic hitchhiking ghosts effect. It is from this point we hop all the way across the United States to Walt Disney World in Florida to talk about their mansion. Now, the mansion in Florida bears a striking difference from the mansion in California, namely the key in which the scary theme song is played. Did you notice that I changed it? Notice it's in a different key. Spooky, huh? Little known fact. Okay, you got me. Well, the key isn't the only thing that's different about the ride. Namely, the Haunted Mansion in Florida has 2 scenes that are absent in the Disneyland version. Of course, by this I mean the endless stairway and the library. Also, the changing portraits hallway is different in the Walt Disney World version because in Disneyland you're walking through that hallway, whereas in Walt Disney World you are riding your doom buggy down that hallway. The hitchhiking ghost animatronics at the end are different, and they have video effects instead of the animatronics that follow you home in your doom buggy at the end of the ride in the mausoleum. Now, the Walt Disney World mansion was there at Magic Kingdom since opening day. Now here's an interesting little tidbit about the attraction. While they were building the Disneyland version, they were also building doubles of everything to put in the Walt Disney World version of the mansion. That way when the mansion opened, all they would have to do was put everything in its place and everything would be good to go, minus the scene changes obviously. They also got Paul Frees, the voice of the ghost host, to record additional audio for both the grand staircase and the library. Because of the ample room in the Magic Kingdom, they could build the ride however they wanted to without having to worry about the railroad berm like they did at the Disneyland mansion. The story between the 2 mansions is more or less the exact same. You're going on a tour led by the ghost host around the haunted mansion. Although Walt Disney World's version does include an interactive queue that Disneyland's version does not have. You can solve a murder mystery, push some books around, play some instruments, and there's a nice little reference to Captain Gore, the original antagonist or main character of the Disneyland mansion. Also make sure to look at the ground for Constance Hatchaway's or the Ghost Bride's wedding ring. This originally was just a leftover support from a beam, but because guests spread the word that it looked like a wedding ring, it caught on and Imagineers made it an actual wedding ring. Now, how Constance Hatchaway ended up in the mansion is more or less unknown. We all know the story of Constance beheading her husbands, but how she ended up in an antebellum house in the South or a Gothic house in the northeastern United States is completely unknown. The idea of the Ghost Bride, though, came from the original concept for the Haunted Mansion story featuring Captain Gore and, yes, his wife. Now, it wouldn't be a proper Halloween episode if we didn't get into some spooky urban legends and tales about the mansion, so I'm going to do just that. These stories are taken courtesy of doombuggies.net, the one-stop shop for every single piece of Haunted Mansion trivia you could ever want. The Man with the Cane. Now, this ghost story is specific to the mansion in Orlando. Cast members were told that a man with a cane would appear in an empty doom buggy in the load area late at night when ride operators were by themselves at the load position. For those of you who are not aware, the maids and servants who are in charge of making sure the guests get on board their doom buggies properly are alone for a little amount of time between the stretching rooms opening and closing. The guests come in waves, and between those waves, the cast members are completely alone with just their thoughts and the spooky organ music of the Haunted Mansion. It is said that during these times of silence and isolation, a man with a cane will appear in a doom buggy circling back around from the unloading area. The cast member would then phone the unloading operator, who would deny sending anybody through to the loading area. Of course, when the doom buggy came out on the other side of the attraction, it was completely empty. Needless to say, that cast member was very relieved when the stretching room doors opened and more guests came to greet them. But the question remains, who is this man What was he doing on the attraction, and where did he go? You decide. When the mansion was first under development, Walt Disney decided that there would be no old gross trees and there would be no dilapidated mansion, and that everything would look pristine and new. He did not want any guest mistaking theming for mismanagement. He was famously quoted as saying, "We'll take care of the outside and let the ghosts take care of the inside." Now, if you look at either of the mansions today, more so the Walt Disney World version, you can see that this has kind of been done away with. The Walt Disney World mansion looks older, dirtier, and the trees have grown and crooked. Disneyland less so, but still a little bit more well-loved than it was on opening day. Now let me hear from you guys down in the comments below. Which mansion do you prefer if you have been on both of them? The Walt Disney World version of the Haunted Mansion or the Disneyland version of the Haunted Mansion? I would love to know where people sit when it comes to what the superior mansion is. And lastly, we cannot depart from our American mansions without mentioning a very spooky and common ghost story. It is more common than one would think for people to spread their loved one's ashes in the attraction. Unfortunately for these grieving families though, the ashes are vacuumed up at the end of the day like any old dust would be. Sorry guys, it's just procedure. Now we go over the Atlantic Ocean to another very popular mansion. For those of you who have been on it, we can agree that Phantom Manor has a darker tone than the American mansions. When Imagineers were planning Euro Disneyland, now Disneyland Paris, they decided that certain staple attractions at both Disney parks in America would have to be changed in order to meet a European audience. Well, that, and they just wanted to shake things up a little bit. One of the attractions that they decided to redo was the Haunted Mansion, and this time, you can bet that they were going to have a cohesive story. Instead of tying into Liberty Square or New Orleans Square, this Haunted Mansion would tie into Frontierland and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. The stories of these attractions would play off each other and intertwine. When looking for story influences, Imagineers turned to a classic French story, Le Fantôme de l'Opéra, or the Phantom of the Opera, as we Americans know it. They wanted a distressed woman and a phantom to be the two main characters in this brand new story that they were weaving. They also included many different European Gothic legends which were changed a little bit to fit the Western theming. The exterior of the house was modeled after the Victorian Second Empire, and it bears a very strong resemblance to the Psycho House, which it is not based on. Tony Baxter, who was the executive designer for Walt Disney Imagineering, wanted to expand on the story of the bride featured in both American mansions, even though this bride would be a different person. The specific building that Phantom Manor was based off of was called the Ward School in Virginia City, Nevada. When coming up with a name for the mansion, they could not use the classic Haunted Mansion name because it did not translate very well into French. They needed a title that translated the exact same into English as it did into French, and Phantom Manor is the one that they went with. The title, The Haunted Mansion, translates directly into French as Le Manoir Hanté, which translates back into English as The Haunted Manor. So those two different titles wouldn't work very well for Imagineering. They needed something that would translate to the exact same phrase in both English and French. The name Phantom Manor did exactly this, and also incorporated the new Phantom character into the title, so that didn't hurt either. Now, the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad ride and Phantom Manor at Disneyland Paris were both heavily inspired by the Western River Expedition, the proposed substitute to Pirates of the Caribbean at Walt Disney World. And if you ask me, I think they should have went with building the Western River Expedition over Pirates of the Caribbean. It would have been a lot better. The ride is structured almost to the exact same as the American mansions, and I am going to do the virtual walkthrough tour right now. Originally, the mansions in America were designed to look clean and aesthetically pleasing. Phantom Manor, though, is designed to look clearly derelict and stands at the top of a hill looking over Big Thunder Mountain. The mansion's grounds are overgrown with weeds and dead vegetation. The plaque outside Phantom Manor states the title of the attraction and the phrase, "I shall not die completely," in Latin. In the queue, guests will pass by a gazebo with a tea set laid out. Originally, the cups and the tea set would move to emulate ghosts moving and drinking the tea. At night, the light in the gazebo flickers eerily. Inside the gazebo is also a music box that plays a small tune, which is also heard during Haunted Mansion Holiday at Disneyland. It's also the tune that I'm playing in the background right now. The guests then enter the ride through the front door, just like at Disneyland. It is from here where guests enter the foyer. It is a very dusty room with a chandelier and 2 mirrors and is lined with dark wooden paneling. The voice of the Phantom calls from the ceiling around the room, politely welcoming guests and telling them to listen to the legend of this house, inviting them to explore the manor further. Guests looking at the mirror will notice Melanie, the bride's face, fading in and out during the narration. It is from this foyer area guests enter the stretching room, or the portrait gallery as it is called in Phantom Manor. The gag and the effects in this room are very, if not exactly similar to the stretching rooms in the States. The 4 portraits all feature Melanie, and as the room appears to stretch, the portraits turn from happier into much more grim versions of themselves. It is here where one of the homages to the Haunted Mansion occurs. The Phantom will point out that this chamber has no windows and no doors, which offers you this chilling challenge to find a way out. Of course, there's always his way. When the lights go out and the lightning flashes, guests look up like they would in the Haunted Mansion and see Melanie's fiancé being hung by the Phantom. A secret door then opens and reveals a hallway lined with changing portraits. The portrait gallery in Phantom Manor is the same as the stretching room at Disneyland, where the floor is lowering itself, rather than the ceiling rising above you like in Walt Disney World. The changing portraits in the hallway after the portrait gallery are actually the exact same as the portraits in the American versions of the attraction, minus one. The one portrait that is Paris exclusive is a woman reclining onto a sofa and becoming a panther, beast, tiger, sort of. She becomes a monster. It is here where guests enter the loading area, which features a grand staircase leading to an upper floor. They can also see a ghostly, foggy landscape outside the window. After guests board their doom buggies, they travel upwards into a dark space past a young Melanie bowing to the guests while holding a candelabra, singing the Phantom Manor theme song. After this, we pass a twitching suit of armor, which is so minute you might miss it in the low light. On guests' left side, they will pass a conservatory containing a piano, very similar to the Walt Disney World version with a ghostly person playing the piano. From here, the doom buggies travel to a corridor lined with doors. As guests pass each door, they hear pounding, knocking, or shouting behind it, and the knockers seem to move by themselves. As I describe it, you can probably find a lot of similarities between this and the Haunted Mansion. From here, guests will enter the seance room, which is very, very similar to the ones at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, except Madame Leota's lines this time are a little different. After the seance room, guests will enter the grand ballroom where a ghostly wedding party is taking place. Melanie stands on the staircase, singing and looking up at the Phantom, who stands in an open window, laughing at her as lightning flashes behind him. All sorts of wedding guests appear and disappear from the room. On the massive dining table, a moldy wedding cake is waiting for everybody. As you pass through the grand ballroom, you pass pairs of ghostly dancers, much like the ones at the Haunted Mansion. Leaving the ballroom, the guests enter the bride's dressing room, which replaces the attic scene. By the light of a dying fire crackling in the fireplace, guests see Melanie, now as an elderly lady, as she has given up on looking for her long-lost groom and sits weeping in front of a giant mirror that looks like a skull. The guests then leave the bride's dressing room through a door and glide across a terrace and then into a stormy graveyard past the Phantom with a shovel, whose skeletal face has been revealed to them at last. The doom buggies then travel underground, presumably under Big Thunder Mountain, and see a series of coffins being opened by their skeletal residents, as well as skeleton hands attempting to pry open a coffin from the inside. It is here where the graveyard scene would take place in the normal Haunted Mansion, and it is very apparent, except way more disturbing in the Phantom Manor version. Grim grinning ghosts is heard playing, and guests pass the marble busts, just like at the Haunted Mansion. Doom buggies then pass through a horrible, demented version of Thunder Mesa from Big Thunder Mountain. It is here where guests should listen, because the mayor of Thunder Mesa has a very, very familiar voice, that of Paul Frees narrating the ghost host lines from the original Haunted Mansion. Much of this Phantom Canyon scene was derived from a planned scene of a Wild West mining town called Dry Gulch in the Western River Expedition, later retooled into their version of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Another laughing figure of the Phantom, this time a revolting corpse in rags, leads the guest into the exit of the ride. As they see the silhouette of the manor ahead, they enter a dark passage where Melanie's skeleton, floating and radiating a glow, is pointing the way out. Guests then enter a large underground chamber filled with mirrors where a ghostly image of the Phantom can be seen above the carriages along with a reflection of the guests themselves, obviously an allusion to the hitchhiking ghosts. The Phantom then violently shakes the carriages before dissipating in a twinkling of lights, but not before hearing one last laugh. Vehicles then travel through a wine cellar where cast members await to help them disembark their doom buggies as they walk towards the exit. As guests travel towards daylight, a tiny figure of Melanie stands to the side of the passageway behind bars, telling guests to hurry back and to bring their death certificates. Basically, it's taken verbatim from Little Leota at the end of the Haunted Mansion in America. Finally, guests exit into Boot Hill, a cemetery filled with humorous gravestones as well as ride-oriented gravestones for the Ravenswoods and several others. In a very similar fashion to Snow White's Scary Adventures at Disneyland, if guests turn around and look up at the mansion, they can see the Phantom peering through a window down at them. As you pass through the cemetery, you can hear Melanie's heart still beating inside her tomb, which is a reference to the Beating Heart Bride, better known as Constance Hatchaway, better known as the Ghost Bride in the Haunted Mansion. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, your tour of Ravenswood Manor has been completed. Now, it just occurred to me that I have been telling you the entire walkthrough of the attraction without even telling you the original story first. So let's talk about that, the story behind Phantom Manor. Our story begins with Henry Ravenswood, a western settler who struck gold in Big Thunder Mountain and founded the Thunder Mesa Mining Company. With the founding of the mining company, a small city grew called Thunder Mesa. Ravenswood became rich and built himself a huge home high on Boot Hill overlooking Big Thunder Mountain. Eventually, Henry got married and had a daughter, Melanie. Now, Big Thunder Mountain was rumored by the natives to be home to the Thunderbird, a powerful spirit possessing a treasure. According to legend, its wrath could be materialized into a terrible earthquake. Of course, Henry was not one to believe these stories and continued mining the mountain. As time went on, the gold veins that they had already been mining were starting to go dry, causing miners to dig deeper and deeper into Big Thunder Mountain towards the soul of the Thunderbird said to be lying in the center of the mountain. As time went on, Melanie grew into a beautiful young woman and became engaged to a train engineer who promised to take her far away from Thunder Mesa, much to the dismay of her father, Henry. Henry did everything he possibly could to stop the wedding, but his useless attempts were put to a stop when a terrible earthquake killed him and his wife Martha. It seemed that at long last the Thunderbird had been reawakened, and the family was never heard from again. After several years, the story of what really happened came out from underneath the rubble. On Melanie's wedding day, a mysterious phantom unknown to anyone appeared in the house. While Melanie was preparing in her room, the phantom lured her groom up to the attic where he hanged him by his neck from the rafters, which we see in the stretching room. In the ballroom, the bride sat alone. Hours went by with no sign of the groom. Guests slowly filed away, leaving Melanie alone in the house with the staff of maids and butlers. She told herself that someday he will come back. And so, after never having taken off her wedding dress or dropped her flower bouquet in preparation for her loved one's return, she wanders the house aimlessly, singing melancholy songs of lost love. But the phantom was still in the house, laughing at her human devotion to her intended husband. One after one, he invited his dead demonic friends from the afterlife to fill the house in an eternal party. A dark curse fell upon the house, and the shape of the house has slowly transformed by evil forces. But that was years ago. Today, as you walk past the house, you see the front door wide open. You hear music. You see maids and butlers ushering people in for a house party. And you decide, why not? And that is where the story takes place. Rumors are circulating that the phantom is indeed Melanie's dead father, Henry Ravenswood, returning from the grave in order to stop her wedding once and for all. Whether or not there is any truth to this rumor is completely up to you. Phantom Manor is an attraction that deals with loss and death, and unfortunately something happened inside its walls in 2016 that deals exactly with this. In the early morning in April 2016, a lighting worker was electrocuted to death backstage in Phantom Manor. The attraction was temporarily closed down while the police conducted an investigation and found that the death was indeed an accident. This makes Phantom Manor the only haunted mansion around the entire world with a death tied directly towards it. And it is from here where we leave the spirits behind and travel to Hong Kong Disneyland, where an entirely different type of mansion awaits us. Mystic Manor is the mansion that resides at Hong Kong Disneyland. For the cultural reason of ancestors and spirits being extremely revered and prayed to, they decided not to go with ghosts in this version of the mansion. And instead we have the magical Mystic Manor. And while containing references to the Haunted Mansion, it also contains references to other Disney attractions like the Enchanted Tiki Room. So very interesting. Mystic Manor utilizes a trackless ride system like Pooh's Honey Hunt in Tokyo, Ratatouille in Paris, and soon to be Ratatouille in Epcot. Something interesting about Mystic Manor is it continues the Society of Explorers and Adventurers motif that is found all throughout Tokyo Disney Sea and the rest of the Disney parks, sort of an overarching Disney story. Members of the SEA include Harrison Hightower III, the owner of the Hightower Hotel, which is Tokyo Disney Sea's version of the Tower of Terror, Barnabas T. Bullion, who is the owner of the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in Walt Disney World and looks remarkably like a certain Imagineer, Dr. Albert Falls, for whom the magical and wonderful Schweitzer Falls are named after in the Jungle Cruise, Mary Oceaneer, the main character of the Misadventure Falls water slide at Typhoon Lagoon, and of course the main character of the Mystic Manor attraction, Henry Mystic. Now let's get into some of the backstory of Mystic Manor. Walt Disney Imagineer Mark Schrimmer is the executive creative director of Mystic Manor, along with Mystic Point, the new land that's home to the groundbreaking ride. For Hong Kong Disneyland, Schrimmer and his Imagineering team crafted an elaborate story inspired by some of the most widely enjoyed Disney attractions of all time, knowing that what they were creating would immediately be compared to the Haunted Mansion. It is from here where the Imagineering team crafted an original Disney attraction, not based off of any films or property previously existing. They based the attraction on world exploration, and it is from here where we transition from the history of the attraction to the backstory of the story. Mystic Manor is the mansion that Henry Mystic built in an uncharted tropical wilderness plagued with supernatural events. The mansion was built out of Henry's love for the unusual happenings and officially dubbed the area Mystic Point. It is at Mystic Manor where many of his findings, as well as findings from other members of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, are displayed. More recently, Henry has brought in a new exhibit, a mysterious music box that has been rumored to bring inanimate objects to life. Henry Mystic has recently decided to open up his mansion for tours of his collection, and you have been invited personally. And it is from here where we transition into the virtual walkthrough of Mystic Manor. As guests wait in the queue, they will notice a portrait of Lord Henry Mystic and Albert, Henry's adorable pet monkey, posted on the wall. Then guests are arranged to move into the pre-show and watch a slideshow narrated by Lord Henry Mystic. Henry gives a short speech on the exhibition rooms and his latest collections and emphasizes an enchanted music box full of rare magic, which must be opened with caution. From here, guests enter the loading area and board their horseless carriages, the vehicle that takes guests on a circle tour of the museum. The first room is the acquisitions and cataloging room, where Lord Mystic's collections are temporarily stored and await placement on shelves. Henry appears and warns the guests about the box before disappearing into the house. Meanwhile, Albert pops out and, as you can guess, opens up the music box, bringing the entire house to life. From here, the guests enter the music room, where musical instruments come to life and begin playing themselves. The music then follows guests throughout the rest of the attraction until the very, very end. Then, from here, the guests enter the Mediterranean Antiquities room. Paintings, ceramics, and audio-animatronic statues start to move under the influence of the magic box, magic. The carriages first pass a large painting portraying 4 people dining under a volcano. As the magic affects the painting, the volcano erupts, submerging the people in lava, who then clink their glasses together. Beautiful. After passing numerous different exhibits, the horseless buggies then pass a mosaic of a beautiful woman who morphs into a frightening Medusa. This, of course, is a reference to the changing portrait in the Haunted Mansion of the woman turning into Medusa, the first of many references to different Disney attractions in Mystic Manor. The carriages then move into the Solarium room, another reference to the Haunted Mansion because this room contains a conservatory. In this room, we can see a giant Venus flytrap has our poor monkey friend Albert in its clutches. Albert escapes the clutches of this evil plant and the room goes pitch black. The carriage then enters the Slavic Nordic chamber. Here, the painting of a Nordic god comes to life and blows freezing wind towards the guest. The freezing wind leaves the painting and spreads ice throughout the entire room, finally gathering on a large mirror that shatters the guest's reflection. I can take this only as a very obscure reference to the Hitchhiking Ghosts because, mirrors and guests in the mirror, and then affecting the guests with the mirror. It's just Disney magic, folks. They then move into the weapons and armor room, which is full of weapons and armor that have come alive. First seen is a set of samurai armor wielding a katana that tries to slice Albert. Albert, though, fortunately dodges every single slice, almost as if he's designed to do that. A cannon then opens fire on the guests, which knock the carriages back and send it spinning away. The carriages pass through a hallway containing 3 suits of armor, their helmets floating next to their bodies and singing along with the music, another reference to the Haunted Mansion. I mean, come on, floating heads singing along with a song? That screams Haunted Mansion, folks. The horseless buggies then move in front of a large medieval catapult, which loads and takes aim at the guests, knocking them into the next room. These poor guests is all I can think of. They just keep getting shot from one room to the next. Guests enter the Egyptian Antiquities room. A sarcophagus glows with an unearthly green glow as swarms of scarabs emerge from it. The scarabs cover all the lights and the guests are stuck riding through the darkness. But that is not the end. The tribal arts room is waiting for us at the end of the darkness. A large tiki figure dominates the room, spewing lava from its mouth. The room is full of chanting and tribal drums, all in tune with the music. 3 tiki statues aim arrows and dart guns, which reveal Albert pinned to the opposite wall by their ammunition. This whole room is another reference to a very classic Disney attraction. I mean, chanting, drums, tiki's coming to life. You can kind of guess what ride this is a reference to. The carriages then enter the Chinese salon, where a giant jade Monkey King statue is brought to life and uses its staff to create a tornado, making the room spin and causing all the paintings in the salon to break apart. As the vehicles continuously circle the room, Albert appears on a wall and the statue tries to hit him with a bolt of lightning. This only succeeds in blowing away a portion of the wall, which crumbles, showing the night sky. Albert the monkey is almost blown away from the manor, but manages to hold onto a large harp as the enchanted music box suddenly appears. Albert jumps onto the box as the carriages move back towards the first room. Acquisitions and cataloging. The music from the music room that's been following you this entire attraction climaxes as the magic flies back into the box. Albert then slams the lid shut and breathes a sigh of relief as the lights come back on, revealing a perfectly normal room. Lord Henry Mystic then appears behind Albert, happy to have finally found him. He asks Albert if he touched the music box, which Albert immediately denies. Wondering as to whether or not the legends are true, Lord Mystic thanks the guests for touring his home and bids them farewell as the vehicles move back into the unloading station. And that, my friends, is Mystic Manor. It is very interesting to see an attraction that has nothing to do with the Haunted Mansion, but is also very closely tied with it. It's also very fun learning about the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, something that ties all of the parks around the entire world together. Originally, it was planned for real people to be standing on a green screen portraying the characters in the Mystic Manor attraction, sort of like Journey into Imagination at Epcot. Luckily though, the Imagineers decided that they wanted to stick to their roots. Every character in the ride would be an animatronic or a practical effect, which I appreciate greatly. One final reference to the Haunted Mansion is in the gift shop for Mystic Manor, the archive shop. When you enter the gift shop, make sure to look at the walls. Now, I don't know about you, but that wallpaper looks extremely familiar. Mystic Manor is interesting to me because it is something that stands completely on its own, separate from the other haunted mansions across the world, but also one and the same. So if you ever find yourself at Mystic Point, make sure to stop in for the tour of Mystic Manor. Let me know how it goes. Now there is one more mansion that you might think I have forgotten, but I promise you, I have not. The Haunted Mansion in Tokyo Disneyland is more or less the exact same as the mansion in Orlando, and it is part of Fantasyland in this park, rather than Liberty Square or New Orleans Square as in the other ones. The one thing that sets this mansion apart from Orlando, though, is it did not receive the 2007 updates that the Florida mansion did. This means that there is no grand endless staircase, and that the bride in the mansion is the same as the one that was there before 2007. You see, there was no Constance Hatchaway in this version of the attraction. Instead, it was just a silent bride holding a candle with glowing eyes. Pretty spooky if you ask me. Imagineering, though, has different names for these brides. The original bride was known as the Beating Heart Bride, while the new Constance Hatchaway bride is known as the Black Widow Bride. Not that Black Widow. Unless they wanted to do a Marvel layover of the Haunted Mansion. The Tokyo Mansion also receives the Haunted Mansion holiday overlay that the Disneyland Mansion does once every single year. So if you would like to experience Haunted Mansion holiday in a slightly different way, just simply catch a flight over to Tokyo and visit Tokyo Disneyland. Haunting. Ghoulish. Nostalgic. all words I would use to describe the Haunted Mansion. From its humble beginnings as a project led by Walt Disney himself, from a walk-through wax museum to a boat ride like Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansion even today continues to grow and evolve with the changing of the times. And around this time of year, what better attraction to talk about than the Haunted Mansion? Even after gracing the park for almost 50 years now, the Haunted Mansion still continues to attract visitors of all ages to take the tour and to find a way out. And with hopefully a feature film coming sometime in the future, it will continue to scare and entertain guests for years to come. So with Halloween right around the corner, I ask you, what is your favorite mansion in the entire world and why? Make sure to leave that down in the comments below. And please, hurry back and make sure to bring your death certificate. If you decide to join us, make final arrangements now. We've been dying to have you. Hello everybody, I hope you enjoyed this very spooky Halloween episode of Offhand Disneyland. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Make sure to follow me on Twitter if you haven't already to keep up with me, and donate on Patreon for access to videos early and giveaways. So I mean, that's kind of cool, right? Also, if you couldn't tell, this episode is about 40 minutes long. I'm trying to gauge how much you guys enjoy this, so make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know if you enjoyed these longer episodes. Anyways, guys, I gotta thank you all so much for watching, wish you all a happy Halloween, and I will see each and every single one of you in the next video. Goodbye.